Yeah, I think that people don't. I think that's a good valid point, is that people don't know what their boundaries are. I did this course last week, it was called the Map of Loss, and one of the things that came up was this anger loop. And when we were talking, I was talking about my anger and how I blow up, and he's like, oh, you just go straight to secondary anger. And I was like, what do you mean secondary anger? Because I've had this concept in my mind that all anger is bad. I should just never be angry. The concept of primary anger is like when someone crosses a boundary, you're able to go, hey, this is not okay. I'm uncomfortable with this, and this is why I'm uncomfortable. And then holding that space at that point, rather than being triggered and wounded and responding from that place of the little boy. And there's a whole bunch of different layers that come with that, right? Passive aggression, yelling, screaming, whatever that is. So I was just wondering what your kind of thoughts are around this concept of like primary anger and secondary anger, and how people can manage that in their own lives.
Well, first of all, it's the first time hearing about it, so thank you. I think it's a good insight, and it's a good insight into like our instinctive nature and defense mechanism that we've developed, which is now hardwired into the brain, right? If you think about coming across something that's unsafe, was a threat, that emotion, the energy, the anger comes up as a form of protection. When you speak about crossing boundaries and staying firm in primary anger and communicating clearly, I think what goes missing, especially in FIFO and for a lot of men, is they don't know what their boundaries are. So if you don't know what your boundaries are, you don't know what you value, you don't know how you want people to show up for you based on what you want from life and how you want to show up in the world as a human being yourself, then it's probably going to be easy to drop back into that secondary anger as you speak about, because like, shit, I don't know what my boundaries are. All I know is that I'm feeling threatened. I'm going to have to respond in some way, and the only way to respond if you're not clear on your boundaries and your values and how that person should show up for you is by either being defensive, which I've been very good at, especially in my relationships and with my parents, being defensive or being attacking, right? So defensive being like passive aggression too. I think that probably is the trap for a lot of people, men and women, and it's about how do you build in those values, those boundaries, so that you can over time get clear in saying, hey, that's unacceptable. From friends that I hold close, if you're showing up that way, you're not helping me become the person that I want to become and have the life that I want. So this is what I need from you moving forward. Without that, obviously, it's going to be pretty bloody hard. What about you?
Yeah, I think that people don't. I think that's a good valid point, is that people don't know what their boundaries are. And I think a really powerful way to find out what those boundaries are is to keep a journal of what went on during the day and what were the triggers and what were the things that upset you. And that's something that I've really been practicing since just before Christmas this year when I went to Queensland. I got back into the habit of just writing down, and it doesn't have to be on a piece of paper, it can just be on your phone. So I think, and Apple's got a journal app now, which is crazy, but I think this stuff's going to come up for us, but if we don't explore it and understand it, then we're never going to shift it. So that's the piece of like, can I be curious about my anger rather than leaning into shame and guilt? Because when we lean into shame and guilt with anger, we just hide it. We're likely to add in resentment to the person that we're angry at, even though we're really angry at ourselves and we have shame and guilt about ourselves. We're likely to like throw something into the resentment bucket, which will then just add fuel to the fire. So when the boundary might have been something quite big, the new boundary is actually like, my wife asked me to take the bins out, and that's the thing that I'm blowing up about now. So all of a sudden the boundaries are blurred and we don't understand, and the triggers are getting smaller and smaller, so the reactions to that are getting larger and larger. So the way I think that people can explore that is to jump into a journal and just write down and be curious about what went on the day. And it might be just like locking yourself into 10 lines. So it's not this big onerous thing that I need to write 1,000 words about my day. It can just be like 10 lines. What are the first things that pop in your head about your day, and just tap them out on your phone, and it kind of gives you some insights that you might not have had otherwise.
That's cool. I think the boundaries as well, when you talk about curiosity around that secondary anger and going from firm anger to attacking, defensive, passive aggression, is having that boundaries, understanding values and who you want to be. When you then hit that secondary anger and you are curious, it's like, oh, hold on, I'm getting angry, I'm being attacking, I'm being defensive, I'm shutting down, I'm doing whatever, right? I'm responding in this way based on the boundaries that I understand for myself, based on who I want to be. They're not crossing any of those. So what's happening within me? What am I making that action mean about me to respond this way?
That drops into Richard Swartz's work, which is all about the parts of us. I'm listening to No Bad Parts at the moment, which is we have these like firefighters and protectors and exiles who kind of sit within our body and they behave in certain ways. And Bryn uses the term unwanted tenant or unruly tenants who show up in a way that we don't necessarily want them to. I guess it's about that curiosity piece, is like leaning into what is that part of you that is showing up that way. So if Corey, as this healthy 48-year-old man, wants to show up in the world this way, but this thing's happening, where is that sitting within our bodies? You know, it's getting in this space of woo-woo, but it's really interesting when you start to explore like what are the parts of you that show up, who are the firefighters and why are they showing up, and who are the exiles and who are the protectors. I know for me, my protector, he was like, when I was 14, hey Corey, you should go to the gym and get big, and then no one's gonna mess with you. And I held that for the longest period of time, right? So it's really interesting when we actually start to explore these inner parts of ourselves and why they're showing up that way and how we can hold them from the space of our higher self, which is us. And I guess the other piece that we often forget about, man, is like having this forgiveness for ourselves. So we can do all this work, but we can still hold the shame and guilt because we don't actually forgive ourselves. We're seeking that outside of ourselves. So when we can lean into going, oh yeah, that happened and it's resolved, but if we don't forgive ourselves, then there's still this residual layer of guilt and shame that stays attached to it. So when we forgive ourselves for it, we actually allow ourselves to move forward in life in a cleaner way.